All right, y'all. Welcome to the Victims of Miseducation podcast. All right, we're here with another one. We got a tragic incident, tragic incident outside of New York, LaGuardia. Um, Plane crash, Air Canada, plane crash. Two pilots dead, 41 injured, nine still in the hospital. All right. First and foremost, let's send prayers out to the families who are impacted by this. Let's send prayers out to the pilots' families, the passengers as well who are affected by this. All right. And let it also be a learning for us. All right. And a call for us to continuously clap our hands when we do land. I've been seeing a lot of that, right, disappear when I've been on flights lately. One, two people clapping, not a lot of people, right, grateful for the landing, right, and also thanking the pilot when getting off the planes. All right, so let's get back to that as we take a look at this wild incident outside of New York, LaGuardia Airport. Air Canada crash, right? So we're going to take a deep dive look at this. We're also going to take a look at some law, get some education out of this, right? So we can get some, take some good out of the bad, all right, when it comes to education and making ourselves aware. So we're going to take a look at some laws in terms of compensation, right? Not really for the passengers, right? Because they're alive, right? But really going into the pilots who risk their lives in these job positions, right? So we're going to get a real good educational learning point when it comes to that as well. So let's take a look at this incident. All right. So I was able to find a good digital first illustration of the incident, and then we'll take a look at some of the passengers' reports. All right, so take a look and let's get it in.
550 Lima X-ray, flighting 175, runway 20, cleared for takeoff.
Truck 1 and Company, LaGuardia Tower.
Truck 1 and Company.
Truck 1 and Company, LaGuardia Tower, requesting to cross 4 at Delta.
All right, so here we have Truck 1 and Company, right, and they're requesting to cross. So they're asking, right, control traffic, hey, we're coming through. Can we cross? Can we cross? Is it safe to cross? Is it okay to cross? Right, so they're asking these questions as we are coming through currently. All right, so we're going to continue on.
Delta.
Truck 1 and Company, cross 4 at Delta.
Truck 1 and Company, crossing 4 at Delta.
Frontier 4195 to stop there, please. Stop, Truck 1, stop. Stop, Truck 1, stop. Stop, Truck 1, stop.
All right, and they're just rewinding it back, right, just a little bit, right? So
Stop, Truck 1, stop. Stop, Truck 1, stop.
all right, so he's telling him to stop. First he tell him to go.
Stop, Truck 1,
All right,
stop.
just slowing it a little bit further.
Frontier 4195.
All right, so it says Frontier 4195, please stop there. So we told it to stop there.
I have to stop there, please.
It's stopping a little.
Stop. Truck 1, stop.
Right, they're not really clear. They're telling Truck 1 stop, right? So it seems like Frontier didn't really hear either, because it told Frontier to stop, then it told Truck 1 to stop.
Stop, Truck 1, stop.
And they're telling it to stop. But you got to tell it to also pull back up. They're not telling it to pull back up at the same time. Right, so you see what's happening with Truck 1. All right, Truck 1's being told to stop. It's not being told to back up. Right, they're not being told to back up. They're just being told to stop.
Stop,
Right.
Truck 1, stop.
And then we see the accident smashes on right in the front. Two pilots dead. 41 went to the hospital. 9 still in the hospital.
Delta 2603, go around, runway heading 2000. Jet 646. Jet 646, I see you collide with a vehicle there, just hold position. I know you can't move. The vehicles are responding to you now.
Is the runway closed?
Delta 2603, go around, runway heading 2000.
Heading 2000, go around, Delta 2603.
LaGuardia Tower.
Truck through 2, runway 4 is closed, correct?
Yes, go on to runway 4 now. Proceed on runway 4, you have access.
Tower, car 90, runway 422 is closed at this time.
90, roger.
LaGuardia Tower, vehicle 98.
98. 98. Vehicle 98.
All right, so we see now in this incident occurring, right, the truck now smashed into each other. All right, so they smashed into each other, right, the truck and the airplane, and it results in 2 pilots dead, 41 injured and sent to the hospital, right, 96 on the plane in total, right, 9 still in the hospital. All right, so we're going to get some of the witness accounts now. So we're going to get some of these witness accounts on what they said transpired in the incident. All right, so we're going to get some of these witness accounts.
Vehicle 98.
Breaking news this half hour. 2 Air Canada pilots have been killed in a crash at New York's LaGuardia Airport.
In accordance with our emergency plan, our mutual aid partners, FDNY and NYPD, immediately responded. Initial numbers indicate that 41 passengers and crew were transported to the hospital.
All right, so 41 passengers and crew were transported to the hospital. Quite frankly, if I was there, I'm not telling people to defraud or anything, but I'm going to the hospital regardless. So you're going to check me out. Regardless if I feel like I'm injured or not, I'm going to the hospital. So to hear only 41 out of the 96 passengers actually went to the hospital, right, kind of crazy in my eyes.
As well as the ARF officers.
So there's the plane. This crash happened as the plane was landing. So that was at about 11:40 p.m. last night. Officials say the jet struck a Port Authority fire truck. The fire truck was responding to another incident that was happening on the runway at the time. So 72 passengers and 4 crew members were on board that plane at the time of the crash. And we're now going to play you the witness account of the crash. And 4 crew members were on board that plane at the time of the crash. And we're now going to play you the witness account from one of those people on the plane.
We went down for a regular landing. We came in pretty hard. We immediately hit something, and it was just chaos from there. About 5 seconds later, we had to come to a stop. But in that short period, I mean, everybody was hunkered down and everybody was screaming pretty quick.
Right, so it was a calm flight, right? Chaos ensues within 5 seconds. Everyone's screaming. Everyone's frantic.
We didn't have any directions because the pilot's cabin had been kind of destroyed. So
right, so no directions at all, because remember, the cabinet pilot's destroyed, which means a speaker system, anything to tell people emergency, that's gone now. Right, so they're even more frantic on what do we do now.
Somebody said, let's get the emergency exit. And
all right, so get the emergency exit. Right, pretty sure that's the flight agent, right, the flight attendants, right, putting in their training now.
And to get the door in, let's all jump out.
Yeah, pretty scary. Officials say 41 people were taken to the hospital. Some have serious injuries. 2 people who were in the fire truck were also hurt. 32 people, by the way, have been released from the hospital.
All right, so 32 people released from the hospital, 9 still in there.
According to Flight Radar 24, the aircraft was going about 210 kilometers per hour when it made contact with the truck. And we have audio now from air traffic control at the moment right before the crash.
Truck 1 and company LaGuardia Tower requesting to cross 4 at Delta.
All right, so we already heard that part. All right, so we're going to get the next video. All right, one more witness account, and then we'll get into some law in terms of the compensation and educate ourselves.
Truck 1 company.
All right.
Continue to follow breaking news this half hour. 2 Air Canada pilots.
I'm sorry, this is the wrong one again. It's the wrong one. Alright, so look at this one.
A crash involving an Air Canada jet has left 2 pilots dead. LaGuardia Airport is closed until at least later this afternoon as an investigation is underway. And we're now hearing from passengers and impacted travelers.
Fear. I mean, it was pretty shocking. I didn't know what to expect. We were honestly sleeping and then landing, and then all of a sudden, boom, woke up in shock. Just didn't know what to do.
One of our friends was...
Right, so this is them into, they're sleeping, they're landing, right, calm flight, and boom, in shock, out of nowhere, chaos ensues. Pretty sure, very scared, but they're very lucky that, right, the rest of the plane did not really get impacted that much other than from the brute force and the feeling of that.
Several rows back from us, and like we walked past him on the way out because he was trying to find his glasses, and his nose was totally broken, bleeding like on his face. Like,
all right, so one person with a broken nose, bleeding profusely, yeah, broken glasses as well. So it seems like his face smashed once again from that impact right into the front of the seat in front of him.
A lot of people smacked their head against the seat in front of them.
A lot of people. You could probably say it, maybe everybody smacked their thing in front of them, right? So I'm not sure why only 41 ended up in the hospital.
My flight yesterday was supposed to be at, what time is our flight? 6. We didn't make it through TSA. Stayed all night in the airport, had a 6 a.m. flight that got canceled because of the accident. So, and because it was a fatality, I got transferred to another airport, so I'm trying to make it to a shuttle to get to the other airport.
Officials say the plane, which was arriving from Montreal, struck a fire truck that was on the runway, responding to another incident.
All right, so a fire truck on the runway responding to another incident. Air traffic control, from what we've seen, told the Frontier to stop, was trying to tell the truck to stop, but didn't tell it to pull back. Right, and this whole accident happens. Right, Frontier unable to stop. It's going 210 miles per hour, right, or kilometers per hour, and it smashes in. Really only have a matter of seconds to make choices.
72 passengers and 4 crew members were on board that jet. Footage from the scene shows the plane's cockpit has what's...
So my bad, 72 passengers and 4 crew members, so 76 people. All right, only 41 ended up in the hospital.
Crushed, debris hanging from the nose of the plane as well. Officials say 41 people were initially taken to hospital, including 2 people inside of that truck. Most have been released, but 9 remain in hospital, some with serious injuries.
One so some have real serious injuries.
One of the passengers was an unaccompanied minor. They have since been reunited with their family.
Oh man, an accompanied minor as well, right? We never wish that to happen. Right. They also, from my understanding, they released a plane incident as well. So all right, let's take a look at that actual footage of it as well.
We want to warn our viewers, you may find this difficult to watch.
Oh, God.
Our viewers, we want to warn our viewers, you may find this difficult to watch.
Oh, God. Oh, my goodness. Right, so we see its impact as well. Oh, God. Oh, my goodness. Oh, that's crazy. Right, so we see the impact here as well. All right, so we see that impact, and we're just going to get into some of the compensation when it comes to this. All right, so we're taking a look at Canada.gov website. All right, because this is an Air Canada flight, right, and the pilots were operating a Canadian plane. All right, so we're going to take a look at some of their regulations and see if we can learn some things from this. All right, so it says flying accidents compensation regulations. All right, regulations prescribing compensation for bodily injury or death resulting from flights undertaken in the course of duty. All right, let's take a look at some of the interpretations of these definitions. All right, we want to look at non-scheduled flight. All right. Actually, first, employee. Employee means any person who is employed in the public service of Canada or under the direction of any department of the public service of Canada other than a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who is a person prescribed in paragraph 27(1)(a). So Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they're like the FBI. They're the federal agents over in Canada. All right. So any person who's employed in the public service of Canada, all right, and who is not a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. All right, it says non-scheduled flight. It says means flight in an aircraft that is not a private aircraft and it is not operated on a scheduled flight. So non-scheduled flight, once again, means a flight in an aircraft that is not a private aircraft and that is not operated on a scheduled flight. So it's not a scheduled flight. It wasn't your scheduled flight. You're just on a flight and something happens, right? That's non-scheduled flight. All right, private flight means an aircraft used by an employee traveling on official government business and for the use of which he is reimbursed in accordance with the rates prescribed by the Treasury Board Travel Directive. All right, and a scheduled flight means a flight conducted under a published statement of frequency and time of departure and arrival, operated by a commercial air service utilizing commercial aircraft. That's a scheduled flight. All right, so it says payment of compensation. An employee dies or is injured as a direct result of a non-scheduled flight undertaken by him in the course of his duties, or a civil aviation inspector. All right, so either an employee dies or is injured as a direct result of a non-scheduled flight undertaken by him in the course of his duties, or it's an aviation inspector dies or is injured as a direct result of any flight undertaken by him for the purpose of determining the competency of the flight crew personnel, inspecting commercial air operations, or monitoring in-flight cabin procedures in use in commercial air operations. All right, so this is who compensation is for in regards to it. It says compensation is payable for his death or injury in an amount equal to the compensation that would have been awarded to or in respect of him in accordance with the rates set out in Schedule A or B to the Pension Act, whichever is applicable, as increased by virtue of Part 5 and 1 of the Act. If his death or injury had arisen out of or was directly connected with the military service in peacetime. All right. So the compensation is payable in accordance to the Pension Act. All right. Let's keep this in note. It says, number 2, no compensation is payable under these regulations for any death or injury in respect of which provision for the payment of compensation or gratuity or pension is made by any other act, unless the claimant elects to accept compensation under these regulations instead of compensation or gratuity or pension under any such other act. All right, so it's saying that no compensation is payable under these regulations for any death or injury in respect of provision of payment or compensation made by any other act. So if you get any funds from any other act in terms of an accident, you're not going to be compensated under this act. This is what this is saying. All right, unless the claimant elects to accept compensation under these regulations. So unless they are accepting that under these regulations. It says no compensation is payable under these regulations for the death or injury of an employee that was due to a self-inflicted wound or any action by him that endangered the safety or normal process of the flight. Right, so they're not going to give compensation if they find out or if they come to a determination that the regulation for these death or injury was due to self-inflicted wound or any action that endangered them. And we seen at the beginning, the air traffic control did say Frontier stop there and then quickly went on to, hey, truck 1, stop. I'm not even sure if Frontier heard that, right? And then the accident happens within a matter of seconds. All right, so it says where compensation recoverable other than under these regulations. So where can you get compensation recoverable other than under these regulations? It says where death or injury in respect of which compensation is payable under these regulations is caused under circumstances creating a legal liability upon some person to pay damages, therefore, if any amount is recovered and collected in respect of such liability by or on behalf of the person to or on behalf of whom such compensation may be paid, the commission for the purpose of determining the amount of compensation to be paid shall take into consideration any amount so recovered and collected in the manner set out in section 5. All right, so where death or injury in respect of the compensation is payable under these regulations is caused under circumstances creating a legal liability. All right, so legal liability is now here now upon some person to pay damages, therefore, if any amount is recovered and collected in respect of such liability on behalf of the person or on behalf of whom such compensation may be paid, right, the commission for the purpose of determining the amount of compensation to be paid, all right, shall take into consideration any amount so recovered and collected in the matter set out in section. So they want to see anything you get, they're going to take this into consideration of their payment. All right, so let's see where that all leads to. It says, where 1/2 of any amount recovered and collected as provided in section 4 is greater than the capitalized value of the compensation that might otherwise have been payable under these regulations, no compensation shall be paid. And this one might add to you as well that there's no law protecting commercial pilots when it comes to Canadian planes. All right. This is for non-scheduled flights. This is not a scheduled flight. And we're going to take a look at what the people in commercial get. There's no law for them. All right. This is all that's here. And we could already see these tricky business tactics. All right. I tell people all the time, look for a nonprofit when it comes to anything you want to purchase, because nonprofits are not doing things for profit. They're still making money and making profit. That's not what nonprofit means. It means they're not doing it with the first intention to make money off of you. They're doing it as a benefit and welfare to the community, and the benefit and the compensation is secondary to them, which puts them in a different mind frame, right? And treating different people different because of their approach. In business, everything is about money and profits. And once you're thinking about profits, you're thinking about saving money. Right? There's no emotions in business. Right? Just want to make that clear. So they're saying if 1/2 of any amount recovered and collected is greater than the capitalized value of compensation. And once again, that compensation was just determination of the person's pension. Right? Nothing for the actual accident and the incident that took place. There's nothing for that exactly. All right. So number 2, it says where 1/2 of any amount recovered and collected as provided in section 4 is less than the capitalized value of compensation that might otherwise have been payable under these regulations, compensation in an amount that if capitalized would equal the difference between such amount and the capitalized value of the compensation that might otherwise have been payable under these regulations may be paid. So they're saying if where 1/2 of any amount recovered and collected is less than the capitalized value of the compensation, all right, so 1/2 of the amount, if that half is less, then they're going to pay you. So they're looking at, all right, if you're going to even get any amount from anywhere else, and once again, their determination is only to pay you what was owed on the pension. If you set up your affairs where you get benefit anywhere else for this accident and it's more than half the amount, you're not getting compensated. This is crazy. This is crazy that they're risking their life flying these planes commercially for their aircrafts, and they're protected by only providing compensation of the pension and nothing for the accident. But if they do something, then they don't get nothing. So what if you do something, and what if it's on your airline now? Where is the compensation in the law for that? This is ridiculous. That's ridiculous if you're asking me. People are risking their lives And these airlines are trying to save money on a death that would be their fault. All right. Number 3, if any amount recovered and collected as provided in Section 4 or any part thereof is paid to Her Majesty, all right, so Canada's under the Queen, compensation in an amount that, if capitalized, would equal the amount that so paid would not in any event be greater than the total compensation that part apart from this section would be payable under these regulations may be paid. So if any amount recovered, collected as provided, or any part is paid to Her Majesty, compensation in that amount, if capitalized, would equal the amount so paid, would not in any event be greater than the total compensation apart from this section would be payable under these. So they're going to pay the Queen. So anything that the Queen is owed, she's going to get that. All right, she's passed, so it's now His Majesty. All right, so they're even protecting the payment for the Queen. Right, they're not getting it. They said it's going to be paid. All right, it may be paid. All right, so payment of other compensation. In addition to compensation payable in accordance with Section 3, compensation shall be paid in respect of the funeral expenses of any employee who dies as a direct result of a non-scheduled flight undertaken by him in the course of his duties. Right, so they're only paying for the death of a non-scheduled flight employee, pilot. All right, and any civil aviation inspector who dies as a direct result of any flight undertaken by him for the purpose of determining the competency of the flight crew personnel, inspecting commercial air operations, or monitoring in-cabin flight procedures, all right, in use of commercial air operations. So they're only going to compensate the funeral for non-scheduled flight employee or any civil aviation inspector who had to do their duty to inspect the flight. All right, and it says in an amount equal to the amount that would be otherwise have been payable in respect of such expenses under the Government Employees Compensation Act, if the claimant had not elected to accept compensation under these regulations and had made a claim under that act. All right, so they could also get it from the other act. All right, so we're going to take a look at something else here. All right, so this, once again, there's only laws protecting flying accident compensation, provides for the payment of compensation to employees or their dependents where injury or death directly results from a non-scheduled flight in course of duty, or in case of a civil aviation inspector where injury or death directly results from any flight taken for the purpose of conducting a flight test or monitoring commercial air operations on that flight. So once again, it's only for dependents where the injury or death directly results from a non-scheduled flight. All right, so I went in, right, did a little, Chat GPT, Google GPT, Google AI. Right, it says, we're reading, the two Air Canada pilots who died in the crash at LaGuardia Airport on March 22, 2026 were likely not eligible for compensation under Canada's flying accidents compensation regulations, as these apply only to employees on non-scheduled flights in the course of duty, not to commercial airline pilots operating on scheduled flights. However, Air Canada pilots are typically covered by employer-provided life insurance, death benefits, pension plans as part of their employment package. Right? So the Air Canada pilots are typically covered by the employer-provided life insurance. So just your regular life insurance you're going to get. Death benefits, pension plans. You're not getting anything extra for a mistake. Not in the law. You're going to have to go pay your lawyers, go attack them, and get compensation. But they've written laws for compensation, and in there, nothing is there for if they're the ones, through their airline and negligence, that has nothing to do with the individual impacted, but has to do with the employees that represent them, that they employed and said was good and trained. If an incident happens or on their plane and their plane breaks down, it doesn't have to be somebody on somebody else's stuff. They don't have to pay. You're only going to get paid based on your provided life insurance, your death benefits, and your pension plans. And this compensation plan says that if you get more than half of the amounts in any of these other areas for something related to this incident, you will not be compensated. And the compensation to begin with was only the person's pension. Only their pension, nothing else. No such reward as they're getting their pension plus this. That's crazy. That's ridiculous. That's insane. That people are risking their life, flying commercial airlines for them, and rigged all in their laws is protection for them to save money when an accident and a tragedy happens and it's their fault. Right? These things are crazy. All right, and this is why I wanted to share this. Because when I was sitting back and I'm like, you know what? The passengers, we know how they're gonna get their money. A lot of the times the airlines already reach out, want to pay them off before it goes to court. But what about the pilot and the employee? How are you treating your own? Let's take a look at that. And rigged in their laws is protection for them to skim the pot when someone dies and to only promise to pay their pension. And then if they get any amounts outside of there and they were set up for an accident in their job in any way and they get any amounts paid that's more than half, then they won't get anything according to the act. That's ridiculous. That's insane. And pilots all in Canada and everywhere need to ensure that their employers who are employing them to fly these commercial airlines are going to pay them when impacted by a tragedy that directly is the fault of the company. There is no excuse for this. Zero. Zero, zero, zero. It's dirty. It's shameful. It's disgusting. There's no place in our world for people, when death arises, do not want to take ownership and do not want to pay up, but want to employ you and send you out there into the danger zone. That's ridiculous. It's shameful. And they should strike for that. All right, they should definitely strike for that. Change those laws immediately. This is why we do this here. All right, we're all victims of miseducation. All right, we're all victims of miseducation. But we can learn. We're re-educating ourselves. This one right here, awareness is the number one weapon. All right, so aware now. Not to say you'll fly a plane, right? But if any pilots are going to see this and weren't aware, or if anybody else not aware, it's time to make some noise about this. The families impacted that they're going to be going through this right now, and we just read what they're going to be going through. All right, once again, prayers to those impacted, the 2 lives lost, those injured in this flight, this Air Canada flight flying in to New York, LaGuardia, that had the loss of 2 lives. All right, that's it for now. We'll check you on the next time. Thank you for checking in. Victims of miseducation. See ya.